finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now. NMLS ID 1492187. Equal housing lender. From the heart of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media, A Neighbor's Choice. And I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gronowski. So glad to be back with you all across FM and AM on our affiliates on radio, as well as our podcast and video live stream on YouTube, Facebook, and our website, aneighborschoice.com. We're going to tackle a lot of news headlines today, but we're also going to be guided by principle as we do it. We're not looking for a clean little binary way of thinking of things. There's millions of parroted programs that do just that. No, we're going to be guided by the principle of personhood, that every human person is sacred, that life is sacred, and it's sacred at every level of its development. You know, it's not just something that you can say life is sacred until Biden and Harris want to go and do regime change, or Trump wants to keep us in Yemen, or you know, life is sacred until they want to just shut down your business and make you sacrifice by force for some greater good that's actually a greater bad. All of those ideas that we find in politics today are actually rooted in culture. They're rooted in things like religion and what we call the sacred. And this program is kind of like a detective show where we unpack the historical forces that are shaping the headlines that we wrestle with today. And one of the things that I saw recently, there was a symposium that the Mises Institute put on with Ron Paul and the Ron Paul Institute in Texas, where Ron Paul resides in his hometown. And they had a great different lineup of speakers. And one of them was our guest that we have now. And that is Daniel McAdams. He is director of the Ron Paul Institute and co-host of the Ron Paul Liberty Report. How you doing, Daniel? Daniel, do we have you? Okay. Daniel McAdams, how you doing? Okay, I'm not hearing Daniel, so let's see if we can connect back with him and see if we can get him on air. Do we have Daniel McAdams?
David.
Yes. Hello, do we have Daniel McAdams?
I can hear him talking through the mic or breathing in his mic, but I don't see why he's not answering.
Okay, let's try again and let's call him on a phone line.
I can't hear anything.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll continue solo until we can hear that we have a connection. So we're going to be talking to Daniel McAdams hopefully here if we can get the connection going, and we're going to talk about his experience overseas and some of the comments that he made in his recent speech in Texas. Do we have Daniel McAdams now?
Hello?
Daniel, can you hear me? Okay, we're going to try. Let's try to see if we can get another connection, and we'll pick up from here. Okay, so we're doing a live show, and this is sometimes what happens when you have a live show. But one of the things that I'm concerned about in this country is the degradation of discourse. You're not allowed to talk about things that counter the big pharma narrative. You're not allowed to talk about things that counter the pro-lockdown dark winter narrative that they put out. Everybody in the globalist ideological frame, they're all talking about build back better, build back better. And if you disagree with them and say, I don't want to build back the way you want to build back, I don't want you to tear down stuff in the first place that will force me to have to build back. I don't want to do that. That's not on my interest. That's not on my desire. So that's one of the things that we have, this build back better mantra that continues to be regurgitated across the globe. And it continues to infect the discourse of the establishment parties, both sides of the aisle. It continues to infect the corporate language that we hear from favored politically connected corporations. It's something that is dominating the discourse in a way that I find to be very disturbing. We want to have a free and open conversation. We don't want to have people regurgitating the same little canned lines that are not exactly as pretty as they sound. When you hear words like build back better, it sounds like, sounds like make America great again, but more focus group approved, right? It's about, they're basically taking the builder's mentality behind the Trump brand of saying, hey, we can build stuff, we can make stuff again. And it takes it and moves it in a direction that makes it more politically correct. We're not making America great again because we don't really want to emphasize America in the globalist perspective. And at the same time, we don't want to say great again because great assumes that somebody's not as great. And that would mean exclusion in the globalist narrative. And then again implies that there have been times in the past in American history that are better than certain times in more recent history. And of course, that is a no-no for a progressive ideology that says that history is moving progressively towards a better direction ever so continuously throughout history, throughout events. It's something that is not to be looked at and said, oh, there was times in the past that were good that we need to look to. No, everything is marching forwards into a kind of, telos of history. That's why Make America Great Again is a heretical line, a heretical dogma. Even if you don't even like the saying yourself, you have to understand there's religious pushback here behind the globalist branding of trying to counteract the meaning behind the symbols of Make America Great Again. So build back better is what they say. It's what Canada says. It's what all these different countries around the world say. And it has a lot of connotations. It means, hey, let's build back better. Let's not have so many mom and pop stores. Let's not have, they just announced Amazon is going to start doing online pharmaceuticals. So what's that going to do for the remaining, mom and pop pharmaceutical stores around America? Build back better means getting people to work from home, isolation. So they've got everything drop shipped at their house and they don't have to have, community the way we used to remember it. Build back better means trying to put more surveillance in mind, putting more control over what we can eat, because in their twisted backwards ideology, they think that things like ancestral eating, like animal foods, animal fats, saturated fats, those things are bad. So they're going to continue to try to demonize those things, make them more expensive, make them more taboo, and even potentially tax them. That's been talked about in the big green industry that's making billions of dollars off of fear. That's all part of their build back better idea. They want to have a lot of them want to have universal basic income. They want to have debt forgiveness. They want to have surveillance. They want to have cashless society. For some reason, that's one of the things they don't want. They want to be able to track and trace wherever you're spending so that people are more easily controlled. They're more controllable in the event that there's something they need to, put a tightened grip about. And that's not something that people who care about freedom, that's not what true liberals like. Nobody should have an interest in that kind of situation. That is not the place for a decent society. The decent society, a kind society, a diverse society will celebrate diversity of thought, diversity of ideas, diversity of culture, diversity of contracts and property, and all kinds of different diversity. And what they're trying to build, these globalist corporations that want to ally with governments to strong arm people, they are using this crisis of a pandemic to build us back into a backwards mentality where there's less liberty, less freedom of speech, less freedom of press, less freedom of self-defense, less freedom of contract, all the things that make America a great place to be at its best. They want to trample and stomp out. And that's the reality of what we're dealing with. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm David Gornosky. You can email me hello@aneighborschoice.com. And that's what we're looking to do. We want to have a conversation that empowers the human person, and that's what we're going to try to build together. So back in just a moment. Your neighbor. Dave and Wally are team drivers for Oakley Transport. One day they came across a very serious accident on the highway. Some might pass on by, but Dave and Wally saw there was no time to waste. They jumped into action and saved 2 people's lives with moments to spare. That's the kind of courageous love we need more of today. It reflects the respected culture Oakley Transport develops with their driving professionals. CDLA licensed drivers. Join Oakley Transport today for a rewarding career. Visit oakleytransport.com. That's oakleytransport.com.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It's a stressful process. There are attorneys in Tampa Bay that keep clients well informed, creating less stress. That law firm is Catania. Personal injury law is definitive full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't realize they have a claim for the loss until they talk to Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's a way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to CataniaCatania.com. Over 28 years in practice. Catania, personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys. Catania, putting families first.
Office Tampa. Not attorney spokeswoman.
Not ready to go to your favorite seafood restaurant? Get the highest quality fish for less, delivered straight to your door by Fast Fresh Seafood. Order our fresh hot snapper, grouper, mahi, and more. They're boneless, skinless, flash frozen the same day, and individually vacuum wrapped. Pick the size filet you want, the amount you want, and checkout's easy at fastfreshseafood.com. The best thing, every fish is on sale. Fastfreshseafood.com. Caught fresh for you, delivered straight to you. Stay home and stay safe.
Hello, this is David Gronowski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a 6th-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com. And first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR. Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm your host, David Gronowski. We're live on radio and podcast, video stream, and other places. You can keep connecting with us, and we'll continue to engage you wherever you are. We have listeners from around the world, listeners around the country, and we enjoy all of our engagements with you. A listener online, Gokata, username, says, I love these streams. Thanks so much for doing them here on YouTube. I look forward to them every day. Well, that's great. I'm glad that you're a big fan of what we're doing here. And YouTube has been difficult for some folks to find our stream because I guess, you know, we critique empire, we critique corporate welfare, we critique big pharma, big banks, big ugly ideas, and they don't like that. They are Luddites. They want old ideas back. They want control, command, oppression. They like to be domineering to people. They don't want to have freedom. And they're very power hungry and sad people that seem to be in the driver's seat of a lot of the social media ghettos that are built around the internet. Another comment, the war on animal fats is disgusting. When we had a doctor, he wanted my little children to drink 2% milk, and I dropped him. Well, that's a good idea. There is a lot of demonization of animal fats, saturated fats, for decades and decades. And I just did an interview that will be out. I recorded it today with a doctor named Dr. Chris Kenobi. And Dr. Chris Kenobi is an ophthalmologist in Colorado, highly respected researcher and a former professor. And he's the founder of cureamd.org, dealing with macular degeneration, but on a whole host of issues. And he realized, and the literature is bearing it out, that the governments have been demonizing animal fats for decades for no reason, and they have been promoting vegetable oils, what are called seed oils, to the detriment of everyone's health. And that's caused a tremendous downgrade in all of our health. He was talking about how in the soy formula, which is pushed very heavily in today's society, that they specifically pull out things like butter and animal fats and they replace it with awful stuff, soy, things that are not meant to be consumed, especially for a little baby whose brain is just developing. I have a big problem with these industrial foods being forced upon us, being subsidized by our government, and what it does to people in the long-term health, what it does for folks when they're not able to have animal fats in their diet, but instead have these fake industrial fats that are not meant to be consumed by human beings, especially at the rates that we're eating them. And you can see the correlation, and you'll see in my interview with Dr. Chris Kenobi that there is this huge correlation between the introduction of seed oils, starting with cottonseed oil in 1866 in America, and continuing onwards with more oils developed that were industrial grade. And it's just so cheap to make these things. I think he said, what was it, just a penny or something, or just very inexpensive compared to, it's like 34 cents for butter versus 1 cent for the vegetable oils. And it's just a massively cheaper thing to produce in mass scale. But the health consequences are severe. And the federal government has subsidized these industries that have made a killing off of vegetable oils and seed oils. And I think that's at the heart of what's going on with the massive spike in chronic illnesses and metabolic dysfunction and diabetes and heart disease, cancer, and other issues that have been plaguing Western societies. It is the prevalence of seed oils and the consumption thereof which has caused the huge uptick in these diseases, alongside the processed flour and processed sugar and other things. And I'm telling you, we have to get back to the basics here. We still have enough freedom in America to be able to change our lifestyles, to see dramatic improvement in our health. Because if we don't have our health, it's not much of a shot we're going to have at turning this country around. If we can't tell the truth about what's good for our bodies, then how are we going to be able to do anything about telling the truth about what's good for our societal body, our social body, right? And that's why you have to be able to tell the truth holistically across the board. And the problem that I have is that there is so much misinformation pushed to us by our government, by our politicization of things like science, of nutrition, of medicine, and things like energy. There's so much misinformation that's been protected by political favor that it's very difficult to have an honest and fair and balanced and truthful conversation about the things that matter most to us. So that's the problem that I have, is that we have a nanny state that wants to control us from cradle to grave. They want to know where we're at. That's what their Build Back Better premise is all about. Build back better. Build back with what? With social credits? Is that what they want? Of course they want that. They want to be able to monitor, track, tag like a bunch of cattle. Do we want to be treated like that? I don't think so. I don't think people who are normal people want to put up with that. The problem is people feel bullied into complacency, into going along with the crowd. They feel bullied because they see what happens to people when they speak out even a little bit. If you're a person on the left and you speak out against the corporate left wing dominating the Democratic Party, you're vilified. You're persona non grata. Look at what they did to Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard was a veteran. She is a veteran. She is a congresswoman. She's a woman of Hinduism, of the religion. She has all kinds of different multicultural background. And yet what happens? She's vilified. Why? Because she goes against their cash cow, which is perpetual war. She went against it. She went against the line that you're supposed to toe in the neoliberal corporate left. And so even though she checked all the boxes for all their policies on pretty much everything else, she didn't want to demonize people on the right, and she didn't want to go and occupy countries with all kinds of different ideas forever. She didn't want to do that. Therefore, she was persona non grata. This is the same party, by the way, that had 1 million people in the streets in 2004 protesting the Republican National Convention in New York City. But yet now they have totally sold out their soul to a pro-war, pro-banker bailout, pro-regulation that are rigged. And it's just not something that we, and the vast majority of us in this country, should tolerate. Now, this isn't a political solution. I'm not talking about voting the right way or voting this way or voting that way. What I am saying is we have to understand the culture. We have to understand the forces, the historical forces that got us to where we're at today. And that means having the courage to speak for yourself. The word is more powerful than the sword. The word, being able to speak and speak the truth, is more powerful than violence and coercion. Those who live by the sword die by the sword. And if you live by the sword, that means you're always trying to force your way onto other people. Use the sword to coerce people with laws, coerce people about what they're allowed to say, bully people, marginalize people, track and trace people, surveil people. All these different things are living by the sword. And when you live by force, when you live by coercion, you die by that. Your society dies by that. And that's something that we don't even fully have a conversation. And then that's why my show is the conversation that has that. We're the show that has that conversation because nobody else is talking about it. Nobody else is speaking out about the reality that we're in. We're just not having an honest conversation, and therefore it's not working out. We're not having the conversation that we should. We need to have a conversation that recognizes that it's okay to disagree, that you don't have to be depersoned or deplatformed or silenced or censored. You don't have to have that. You don't have to go along with never-ending wars. We saw what CNN says. CNN says Trump is reckless. Trump is endangering the country for wanting to precipitously leave a 19-year and counting conflict in Afghanistan. So how long do they want us to be there? How many years do they want us to make lots of money for very, very rich corporations that like us being there? General Smedley Butler wrote the book, War is a Racket. But CNN doesn't talk about that because their interests are against the freedom of people around the world and in your own backyard. And so we should resist vociferously with great confidence their ideas. They should be defeated on the battlefield of idea and discourse. And that's the only way we're going to be able to make it through this time where we feel like war makers are always winning and lies are always winning. No, in the end, the truth will win. But we have to have the courage to present it, even when it feels like it's not popular, even when it feels like it's not worth it. We have to present the truth with vigor, with love, with confidence, and with patience. That's a big one, right? Patience. We don't want to hear that word patience, right? That frustrates us. We'll be back with more. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice. You can email me, hello@aneighborschoice.com. Back in a second.
There is all kinds of lunacy going on. Madness of 2020.
Weekdays 11 to 2.
I'm just so fed up with these Democrats. It's unbelievable.
Get it straight from Chris Plant.
They're so hypocritical. It makes me sick.
It's the Chris Plant Show.
Hey, David, we're working on it.
left is waging war
like I
against
said,
the
the only
police
thing
in the
that we can
United
do right
States.
now.
Sounded like it is.
Thanks profusely for getting to the point. You're a voice of reason.
We can try it this way, but it's probably going to get some feedback to it. So we tried multiple phones. The one phone that we had, like I said, it ran on batteries.
Trump campaign losing another lawsuit related to the election disputes in key states. This one, a Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruling on attempts to invalidate votes.
Despite Trump campaign arguments to the contrary, Pennsylvania's highest court said election officials did not act contrary to law in the way they allowed observers to watch the canvassing. The court said there are simply no requirements that say how close the observers need to be placed to watch the process. Even judges with dissenting opinions called it misguided to think valid ballots would be disregarded based on isolated procedural irregularities.
ABC's Aaron Katersky. The president has not conceded the race. President-elect Joe Biden moving forward with his transition team, getting briefed today from outside security experts. His team also pushing to get more coordination with the Trump administration to be ready to distribute vaccines, which could come as soon as the end of the year. Every state across the U.S. dealing with a surge of coronavirus cases, according to an internal Homeland Security memo. Michelle Franzen, ABC News.
Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm David Gronowski, your host. And we're live on FM and AM. And we're having a great time doing this broadcast today. It's wonderful. And look at this story here on revolver.news. It says America's zombie companies have racked up $1.4 trillion of debt. $1.4 trillion of debt. That is on Bloomberg. They were once America's corporate titans, beloved household names, case studies and success. But now they're increasingly looking like something else, zombies, and their numbers are swelling. From Boeing, Carnival Corporation, Delta Airlines, to Exxon Mobil and Macy's, Inc., many of the nation's most iconic companies aren't earning enough to cover their interest expenses. Almost 200 corporations have joined the ranks of so-called zombie firms since the onset of the pandemic, according to a Bloomberg analysis of financial data from 3,000 of the country's largest publicly traded companies. In fact, zombies now account for nearly 20% of those firms. Even more stark, they've added almost $1 trillion of debt to their balance sheets in the span, bringing total obligations to $1.36 trillion. That's more than double the roughly $500 billion zombie companies owed at the peak of the financial crisis. The consequences for America's economic recovery are profound. The Federal Reserve's effort to stave off a rash of bankruptcies by purchasing corporate bonds might very well have prevented another depression. Of course, that's what they're going to say. But in helping hundreds of ailing companies gain virtually unfettered access to credit markets, policymakers may inadvertently be directing the flow of capital to unproductive firms, depressing employment and growth for years to come, according to economists. So here's the thing. They're wrong about the Fed. They're always going to, when you read anything from these so-called free press outlets, they're always going to sound like permanent state propaganda. That's what they do. They're low rent Pravda is what they are. They don't even have to be actually owned by the government to be shills 24/7 for the interests of big, giant business and government. And so that's what you're always going to get with these media outlets. But it is interesting to see the massive amount of debt that these companies, many of which have been so a part of the highly regulated, cartelized economy and not able to innovate because they don't need to innovate, because they've been highly regulated. All of their competition has been kept at the door, has been kept out of the market. See, that's the problem I have with folks who want to demonize economic freedom, is that when you talk about predatory capitalism requires using force. Remember that principle? Those who live by the sword die by the sword. Where did you hear that from? Where did you hear that saying? Those who live by the sword. If you live by coercion, so if your company is a giant corporation which uses the sword of regulation, meaning you're intervening into peaceful transactions and you're rigging the rules to make it harder for other people to come in and innovate and create creative disruption, creative destruction of bad ideas and outdated concepts, in creating a better product at a lower price, a higher quality for people in things like transportation or travel or whatever. When you have that situation, in front of you, you're living by the sword. If you're benefiting, if you're and that's what these corporations have done. They have lobbied for decades and decades, many of them, to create this highly regulated, cartelized economy. And so their ideas are so outdated because they don't have to change. See, so much of the private sector's problems when you're not getting a good product are usually connected to how highly regulated those sectors are. Look at something like internet providers, internet service providers. That's a highly regulated market, and they act like governments. Very ineffective, not very innovative, not very customer friendly sensitive, not very intuitive, not very cost effective, expensive, slow to change, slow to grow, because they don't have to. Look at the travel industry. In the travel industry, they use old-fashioned computer programs, some of the companies that have been around forever, and they don't change. They use old-fashioned black and white computer programs, old ideas, old, backwards, inefficient methods of creating a product and service, and they don't have to change because government has long used the sword of its intervention to make rules so that competition can't come in and freshen up the place. It's a difference between an organic market and a fake market. We have lots of fake markets, not a lot of organic markets allowed in this country today, because where there's an opportunity for a profit, corporations and government bureaucrats get together and they write rules to eliminate the entrepreneur from being able to do what the entrepreneur does best, which is to create new opportunities where bad, outdated ideas exist to provide a better service at a better price. That's not what we have today. So you look at travel, you look at all these innocuous, like businesses that you don't think of being highly regulated are regulated. And therefore there's a lot of inefficiencies. You look at airline industry, so regulated, big unions, big government, big business, big lobbying firms, big bailouts, all this stuff making them very fragile, very outdated, and not having any incentive to get better, to grow. And it's like a fire. If you don't allow a forest to burn naturally, right, you can create a really bad situation down the road. If you don't allow the natural environment of bad ideas to be purged out of the forest of human ideas in human businesses and human markets, then you're going to have a collection of really bad stuff that can create a really bad disaster at some point that can get out of control. And that's exactly the, artificial market that we have today. Totally cartelized, totally set up in a situation where a few people make a lot of money, not innovating, not providing that good of a product, using bad ideas or ideas that maybe were good like decades ago, but because government prevents competition, those ideas are now stale and outdated. So who wants to call themselves a progressive and truly believe in the economic interventions of our government today? Government, people say in theory, government is there to protect us from bad actors in the market. But that's a myth. That's like a myth that justifies all kinds of ridiculous ideas. That's like a fantasy people tell themselves. Government's there just to protect us. No, they are rigged referees, and they are rigging the game every time you step out to try to start a business or innovate in your industry, there are all kinds of stumbling blocks preventing you from doing the best job you can. And it's causing a lot of people to have a desperate, give up moment where they say, you know what, I give up trying to play the market. Let's embrace so-called democratic socialism. Let's embrace what I think democratic socialism is just more corporate cronyism, corporatism, corporate fascism, whatever word you want to use. I don't see it as anything different, but it promises big differences. It promises, hey, don't worry, we're going to pay off your college loans. We're going to give you free education, free health care, free housing, free everything. And all you got to do is be tracked and traced and monitored and mind your speech, say whatever we tell you to say, use whatever virtue signaling jargon you're supposed to use, and update it every month when it's supposed to be changed, because politically correct holiness codes, speech codes, they don't ever set still. They're always being, constantly updated and more stricter and more different standards applied. So yeah, you have to comply to their little bullying game. And then if you do that, maybe, they'll let you, play their little game and get a little corporate job and, sit in your house on Zoom all day for the rest of your life. Who wants to do that? Nobody wants to do that. Nobody seriously wants, most people don't want to do that. Maybe there's a few people, most people don't want to do it. And we have to be able to allow for a free society. They don't want a free society. They want a cookie cutter society. They want a safe, mediocre society. They don't want risky excellence. Risky excellence evaporates the profits of scoundrels. Risky excellence evaporates the profits of scoundrels. Scoundrels use government regulations to entrench their power over your life to make obscene profits. They work with government regulations and government agencies to funnel your support for their products and services that would not exist in a free and open and fair open market where people can come into the market and leave the market as long as they're not initiating violence, as long as they're not defrauding anybody with scams that are based on lies. But right now, we have a lot of people that do a lot of lies in the market with bad ideas, and it's okay because nobody is there to check them with competition. They don't go out of business. They're like quasi-government bureaucracies. So that's what I see when I see these debt-laden corporations. And propping them up is all government's going to do. They're not going to do anything to deregulate. The only time they'll deregulate some things in a context of heavy regulation, and then they'll act like, oh, look, we radically deregulated. No. That's just not how it's actually going down. This is the myth that government is supposed to be our savior, that government is to be our Messiah, that they will save us, and all we have to do is sacrifice ourselves to them, sacrifice by being loyal to them, by being trusting of them, always trusting. It's pretty bizarre. I just saw this tweet by Josh Hawley. Under oath, Mark Zuckerberg admits Facebook does have tools to track its users across the internet, across platforms, across accounts, all without user knowledge. I ask how many times this tool has been used domestically against Americans, and Zuckerberg won't say. So, that's how they like to do it. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And you think that these people aren't power hungry? They want to track wherever you're going on Facebook, even when you're not on their website.
We have David ready.
We have a situation where people are tracked and traced, even when they're not on Facebook's website. And that's a darn shame. That's a darn shame that people cannot tell the truth. When you sign up for a platform like Facebook, they market themselves as one thing and they do something completely else when you get into a monopoly situation because government rigs the market to prevent people from providing adequate competition. Let's take a quick break. We'll be back with more. When we return, we'll try to get Daniel McAdams on the line from the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Let's take a quick short break and we'll be back in a second. David Gronowski here. Let me tell you about a man named Gabriel. Every day, Gabriel puts on his boots and drives across America to make sure our store shelves stay stocked with the food people count on. See, Gabriel served our country overseas. He knows that America stands for freedom, quality, and caring for others the way we would like to be treated. That's why when Gabriel saw food shelves getting low during the pandemic, he hit the road as a driver with Oakley Transport. In the land of the free, where no one should go hungry, we need heroes like Gabriel to help keep America fed. CDLA driving professionals, join Oakley Transport today. Keep America fed. Visit oakleytransport.com or call them today at 1-877-8-TANKER. That's 1-877-8-TANKER.
Not ready to go to your favorite seafood restaurant? Get the highest quality fish for less delivered straight to your door by Fast Fresh Seafood. Order our fresh hog snapper, grouper, mahi, and more. They're boneless, skinless, flash frozen the same day. Fresh for you, delivered straight to you. Stay home and stay safe.
Hello, this is David Gronowski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission. Fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a 6th-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR.
Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck in a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now. NMLS ID 1492187. Equal housing lender. Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm David Gronowski, your host, and we're joined now by the co-host of the Ron Paul Liberty Report and the director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. We have Daniel McAdams with us. How you doing, Daniel?
Hey, David. Thanks for having me back on your show.
Yeah, it's great to have you on, and I wanted to have you on to talk about your experience with being overseas in the midst of a color revolution and how that might connect to what we're seeing around us today with some of the weird behavior of some media actors and big tech. We just saw Mark Zuckerberg testify that his platform, Facebook, I guess, tracks and traces you all over the place, even when you're not on his website. So, Daniel, can you tell us a little bit about your experience overseas?
Well, I mean, what I think I did is I witnessed the pre-color revolutions. I was over there in the 1990s as an election observer. And, you know, I gave a speech at the Mises Institute last week, and I just sort of connected some of the things that happened there. You know, the U.S., unfortunately, we are the sort of number one regime change country in the world. We're the number one at overthrowing and falsifying other elections, and this is a pattern that we saw overseas, and it had to do with, of course, getting control of the media. And, you know, when there was a candidate that the U.S. disfavored, they would certainly, in the name of supporting democracy through the National Endowment for Democracy, International Republican Institute, and National Democratic Institute, they would simply fund newspapers and media outlets opposed to that candidate. If it was a sitting prime minister or president, of course, they would fund the opposition. and in the name of democracy. And so they would, of course, then have a bunch of polls before the elections, and those polls would be conducted, surprise, surprise, by the International Republican Institute, National Endowment for Democracy, and they showed that the candidate favored by the United States government, the U.S. State Department, and actually George Soros, who never deviated from U.S. foreign policy goals overseas, that candidate was favored, was way ahead, and the only way the bad guy could win would be by massive cheating. And of course, by if some rare chance the bad guy, quote unquote, lost or won on election day, well, then that's just fraud because all the polls showed that he would be cheating. He must have stole the vote. So it's time to get out in the streets and overthrow the results. And this happened over and over. I mean, I witnessed it in Albania in 1996, in Slovakia to a degree. Certainly, I was not in Serbia in 2000, but I was in Serbia earlier, and I was in Croatia in 97. So this is a pattern over and over again. This is something that I've studied for a long time. I was a part of the British Helsinki Human Rights Group out of Oxford in the UK. And what's interesting about the whole thing is really at the time, we felt like this machine that was being created was extremely dangerous because it was perfecting the way to overthrow elections. And of course, we saw that in the 2000s with the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, the Rose Revolution, on, and then the Maidan in Ukraine in 2014. This was perfecting itself as we went, and we knew at some point this is going to be used in the U.S. So I tried to sort of bring all this together in my talk by saying there are an awful lot of parallels in the deep state overthrow of elections overseas, and what at least appears to some of us as sort of a deep state manipulation of the elections here at home.
So it's interesting because it's so much confusion going on, and I think a lot of people are getting red pilled or whatever you want to call it right now because they're realizing that the narratives are not what they thought they were, and that it's a lot more manufacturing of reality going on. What do you make of what President Trump has been saying about the Dominion voting software? Have you looked at that at all? Does that look similar to things you've seen abroad?
We were always extremely skeptical about software being used for vote tabulation. And this is back in the days of Diebold, if you remember that. That was way back when, some of the earliest equipment used. I mean, your listeners may not believe this, but one of the cleanest, if not the cleanest elections that I ever monitored was in Belarus in the mid-2000s for a presidential election. First of all, the voting rules was very clear. The process was very clear. The need to show ID and to sign was very clear. It was very, very closely observed. There were physical ballots put in a physical box. All parties were present to look at the count and to be present at the count. We all sat around a huge table of representatives of every political party plus the vote, the people who were tabulating. And each vote that came out, they would call it for this guy or that guy, and everyone around the table passed it around to inspect it. I mean, it was extremely well done, and within hours, every precinct had reported the votes, and et cetera, et cetera. So the use of these machines, first of all, it isn't necessary. Canada has a physical ballot, and it's a pretty darn big country, at least last time I looked. So it's not like you can't get around. So really, you have to wonder what is the purpose of these voting machines when we know they can be manipulated. And certainly this company, for decades, I live in Texas, and twice Texas refused to adopt this because it's notoriously easy to manipulate. I'm not an expert in computer issues, but from what I've seen, certainly it seems like a pretty high risk.
Right. Yeah, it's very bizarre, but you're not allowed to ask questions. Now, the media kind of allowed you to ask questions about 2000. You were allowed to contest that election. Why is it? Do you think that Republicans are just supposed to play the villains? Like I call the Republican Party the team that plays the Harlem Globetrotters. They're there to get dunked on, and every now and then you got to let them look like they got a few points in, And
then they whine and say, "Well, this isn't fair. You guys did it too."
Yeah.
But imagine if the shoe were on the foot. As you know, David, I'm a non-voter, so I don't really have an axe. I don't have a dog in the race. To say. I mean, I personally I like Trump's foreign policy as uneven as it was. Certainly better than Biden's. Taking a look at who Biden's bringing in, I think is an absolute nightmare if you don't like war. That being said, looking at it objectively, imagine the shoe on the other foot and it was Biden that was just narrowly denied the presidency by Trump, and some things came up that looked pretty fishy. Does anyone believe that the mass media, the mainstream media would not be screaming at the Trump people, what do you have to hide? What do you have to hide? Why can't we look at the votes? Why can't we audit the votes? Why can't we look at the signatures? And of course they would. So it's a big, huge media psyop against the American people that if you actually want to audit a vote that looks on the surface to be certainly very fishy, when you're talking about hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of ballots that only have the president marked and no one else down the ticket, and it's all for Biden, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe it's anecdotal, but if I were Biden and this was a normal world, I wouldn't want to have a cloud over my presidency. Hey, let's find out if the vote's clean.
Yeah. What is that group? What was it that you call the Institute for Democracy? What is that group? They're involved with a lot of these color revolutions.
That's the National Endowment for Democracy.
Yeah.
That is a quasi-government agency. It's a government. It's an agent. It's an independent NGO that is 100% funded by people like me and you, right? So it's independent in that we don't have any control over it, but it's very dependent on our tax dollars. And you see all of the usual neocons and liberal interventionists, depending on your party, that go through that. This is the John McCain people. In fact, John McCain was a longtime president of the International Republican Institute, which is the Republican component of the National Endowment for Democracy. This is the organization founded in the 80s under Reagan to do in public what the CIA did in private, and that was a quote from one of the founders of the organizations.
So they are involved in places like Ukraine and stuff, right?
Absolutely. They were behind the Orange Revolution. They were behind the overthrow of Hugo Chavez. Back, what was it, 18 years ago, and bragging openly about it, regardless of what your listeners think about Hugo Chavez. The fact that the U.S. is manipulating elections overseas and then screaming and crying for 3 years over the lie that the Russians had anything to do with our elections. It's pretty rich. In a way, we sort of deserve it because we're the champions of messing with other people's elections, and now we have it in our own country.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So you have this situation where these folks in the State Department, they like to, I guess they pick a color, right? So why is a color important, and what's the color they've chosen for the American project, if that's what's going on?
That's a good question. I don't know what the color for the current American one was, but this is all sort of the branding that was created by someone called Sharp. And Gene Sharp, he was a CIA contractor who literally wrote the book on how to overthrow governments overseas. And you have symbols that are similar. You have the clenched fist, which is a symbol of the Serbian, the Belarusian, over and over and over revolutions. You have a different color so people can identify and get out there and all wear the color. In Belarus, it was the denim revolution, so everyone had to wear denim. And of course, nobody wearing denim. But it's a psychological operation to sort of get the us versus them mentality going.
Yeah, it's good old tribalism. There's nothing new to it. It's all nothing new under the sun. Hey, Daniel McAdams, thanks for joining us on the program today. Wish it could be longer. We'll do it again sometime. Thanks for sharing your insights.
Thanks for the invite. Take care.
Very good. And check out the Ron Paul Liberty Report, which Daniel McAdams co-hosts with Ron Paul daily on YouTube. You can go to ronpaullibertyreport.com. And so, that's something to think about. It's so weird to see all these same groups that are always trying to dispute some of the same things we've seen in our recent election. They're always saying, when you see those in other countries, that means we need to have regime change, or we need to be involved, or sanction, or do all this stuff. But when it's over here, everything's fine. Don't ever question anything. And look, as our next guest is going to share with us in the next hour, even if everything was on the up and up about the votes, it was still a rigged election based on the polling and the media gaslighting leading up to it. So we'll continue to unpack this. I'm David Gronowski. Thank you for joining me. We'll be back in just a moment with more. Godspeed.